Good morning, everyone. Everyone here in church and everyone out there at home in front of their computer. Welcome. By the way, for those who are at home, if you wouldn't mind going to get a chalice or a candle and light it when we light our chalice, then we will all be together in this service. That would be wonderful. Call to worship. As we worship, let us be reminded of the words from Desmond Tutu. Forgiveness says that you are given another chance to make new beginnings. So let us begin this service with our awareness of our gift to start new beginnings. Thank you, Mary. For this chalice lighting, flame of fire, spark of the universe that warmed our ancestral hearth, agent of life and death, symbol of truth and freedom, we strive to understand ourselves and our earthly home. Welcome to Eastrose Fellowship, Unitarian Universalism. This is our worship service this morning. I'm Reverend Sue Matranga Watson, and I will be your worship leader today. You're stuck with me. We acknowledge the lands on which Eastrose Fellowship, the building sits, and those that are home now to the widespread communities. These lands are the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, Wishram, Cowlitz, Klamath, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapoola, Molalla, and many other peoples who made their lives here. We thank the original caregivers of this land and their descendants who are still among us. If you have a joy or concern and you would like to share, please fill out the blue forms that are in the narthex, or if you are at home, put it in the chat, and it will be written up and I will read it. And then with the form, you put it in the offertory basket when it is passed. It's good to see you all. And those who I can't see, welcome. It is good to be together. We're going to have a responsive reading, and it's number 637, and it is in your hymn book. It's called A Litany of Atonement by Robert Eller Isaacs. I am going to read the dark print, and you and Patty will read the italicized. It's number 637. It's pretty easy because you're going to be saying the same line over and over and over again. Eventually, you won't have to look at the book.
Or me.
For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit.
We forgive ourselves and each other.
And we forgive ourselves
in love.
In love. And we forgive ourselves when we can't pronounce the word. For losing sight of our unity. We forgive ourselves and each other.
We begin again in love.
For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
Thank you. The opening hymn is in the Teal hymn book. It is 1023, Building Bridges. Please stand if you're willing and able.
And we're gonna...
We will sing this in rounds. First, all together. Second one, this starts, then this starts, and then we go to the third verse. time.
I'll try to do better with the story. This is a story called Peace Begins With You. Peace can feel warm, bright, and strong, or calm, cool, and gentle. It can be found in a place that is busy and loud, and be missing in the calmest, quietest place on earth. Peace means different things to different people in different places, in different times in their lives. So, what is peace? Where does it come from? How can you find it? And how can you keep it? There are some things you need just to stay alive. Food, water, a place to live, clothes to keep warm, help you when you are ill or injured. Peace is having the things you need. Then there are the things that you want to help make life good. Small things, like a cup of hot chocolate or Ovaltine on a winter evening, or a walk along an empty beach, or a special place to be with your friends. And big things, like not being afraid, like having the chance to study and learn, like knowing you are loved by family and friends. Everybody is different. They want and need different things in different places at different times in their lives. Peace is being allowed to be different and let others be different from you. And even when people are not very different, there can be problems. They may want to have or use the same thing at the same time. Or there may not be enough of something that everybody wants to go around. So what can be done when people's needs or wants don't seem to fit together? There can be arguments, angry words, silences, or even fighting. It can go on for a long time or for a short time, until one side wins and the other loses, until one gets what they want or need and the other gives up. When this happens, peace is interrupted, but something completely different can happen. There can be another kind of argument, one where both sides explain what they need or want and why, where they listen to one another, where they work together to solve the problem so that both sides can have what they need or want, or at least some of it. And sometimes, between two different paths that can't be brought together, a third way can be found, one that is different from what was first needed or wanted, but that is good for both sides. The third way may even be a better way for everybody. Conflict can be the beginning of something new and good. Every day, people make choices about peace at home, at school, at work. Their choices affect others as well as themselves. The same kinds of choices are made when there are problems between one country and another. Some choices lead, in the end, to war. But through people talking, listening, and working things out together, peace can be protected. It's not always easy. It takes two to work together, but it also takes two to fight. And often it only takes one to begin the first step toward a peaceful solution. Peace has to be a better way. In the end, the only hope of lasting peace in our homes, our communities, and all the countries of the world is a peace that is real for everyone. This can only begin to happen when more people work toward making sure that others have the things they need and at least some of the things they want. When more people work toward making sure everyone is treated fairly. To keep up, we have invented new ways of finding and using more and more of what our planet can give us. Often this causes conflict between the needs of plants and animals and the needs and wants of people. And too often it's the people who have their way. But all things are part of one giant web of life, and in the end, they all depend on one another. So when we think about the future, we must think about living in peace with the land. Peace is something that lives, grows, spreads, and needs to be looked after. That's the story.
Let there be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which we call Eastrose, and is so sacred to many of us, a community of memory and of hope, for we are now the keepers of the dream. We will be receiving your offering for the support of this religious community and the work in the world. At Eastrose, when we collect the offering, half the cash collection goes to an organization performing charitable works in our community, and this month it is Snowcap. This Snowcap is an organization that Eastrose was one of the helping founding members, and it provides services to the homeless and low-income families in East Multnomah County for 3 decades. Supporting the work of Eastrose is one way. Supporting the work of Snowcap is one way Eastrose reaches out with compassion and recognition to our neighborhood. Reverend Patty and I will be handing out the baskets, and you can put not only your donation, but also if you had a joy or concern. And the gifts of the congregation will now most gratefully be received. If you're a first-time visitor, and I don't know if anybody is, but if you are, please let the basket pass. You are our guest. We're going to sing the hymn, We Begin Now, We Begin in Love. We begin again in love. I can't read I printed it wrong. Please listen to the music. It's going to be on the screen. If you want to sing with the words, you may. but it's a beautiful hymn. And please remain seated.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
This is a reading from Catherine Ponder. When you hold resentment toward one another, you are bound to that person or condition by an emotional link that is stronger than steel. Forgiveness is the only way to dissolve that link and get free.
So many things we have to get used to now. We're back in person like that. I've been trying to find a way into the topic of forgiveness, but all I can think of is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The stories about children, whole families lost, burning apartment buildings, an American and others gunned down in a bread line, a movie theater where people were hunkered down, blown up. It fills me with despair, and I want to put all of my energy into hating Putin and the mercenaries he is employing. But that won't accomplish anything. Certainly nothing helpful. A UU colleague who is Ukrainian has a list of Ukrainian support organizations. And we also have a couple of websites which list companies who are still doing business with Russia, and that will all be on our website. Certainly sending money will help the Ukraine, and that might help me feel more empowered. But it won't help the hatred or the forgiving. Forgiving isn't easy, and I'm not very good at it. My family must own stock in righteous indignation. We're angry with one another for things that happened decades ago. My sister won't forgive my mother, and I won't forgive my sister for not forgiving my mother, and it permeates our communication, puts us constantly on guard, invites reactivity. Some of you have seen that one. And it isolates us from the people who know us best. My grandmother, long dead, still haunts me, and I am the only one here who has family dynamics similar to this, or am I? And if you're on YouTube, you could raise your hand. We can't see you, so it doesn't really matter. And of course, it's not just family. Opportunities for forgiveness abound in our lives. Take Eastrose. Most of you by now know that I am retiring at the end of this church year. I'm terribly sad to be leaving Eastrose and all of you. And I thought this sermon might center on all the things I need to forgive myself for the things I never got to in the past 8 years that I thought I would, and that felt important, for all the things that are on my plate now that I won't get to finish, for all the mistakes I made, especially ones that hurt you, and just for leaving you at this time of transition. Though humbling, asking you for forgiveness isn't that difficult. You are a generous group. But forgiving myself takes me back to that family dynamic. Can you find the roots of your own forgiveness behavior? How did your family of origin forgive? Have there been incidents in your life that inform your own forgiveness behavior now? Do you forgive others easily, or do you have to work on it? Have you ever done anything that you or others found unforgivable? How long did it take you to reconcile? Or are you still carrying it today, perhaps years later? Are there others who have done something unforgivable to you? Are they still in your life? Have you forgiven them yet? In his book, Forgive and Forget, Healing the Hurts We Don't Deserve, by Lewis Smedes, he tells a personal story about a cousin who he worked with in a family business. When they were alone, Hank, the cousin, would befriend him. And because Smedes, the author, didn't have any friends in this place, he felt like he needed Hank. But when there were other people around, Hank belittled and criticized him. This happened over and over. Smedes hated Hank. But then as soon as there was no one around, he'd offer his friendship again, and Smedes let him back in. Eventually, years later, having held on to the hurt and anger, he asked the question, did I want to be healed? Or did I want to go on suffering from an unfair hurt lodged in my memory? We are, all of us, pushed into this crucial stage when we feel that someone has hurt us deeply. Will we let our pain hang on to our hearts, where it will eat away our joy? Or will we use the miracle of forgiving to heal the hurt we don't deserve? That was a quote from that book. One of the reasons I have to get better at this self-forgiveness is because underneath the request for forgiveness is anger. For instance, one of the primary years I'm retiring is the pandemic took the stuffing out of me. I'm not just exhausted, I'm angry at everyone who made the pandemic worse than it needed to be. And there are so many people to choose from. So now, more than 2 years in, and who knows what lays ahead, I've got a load of anger. But it's laced with anger with myself for everything I didn't get to that could have made Eastrose stronger these last 2 years. Ministers, like many professions, are dropping like flies. And I'm angry at myself for not practicing better self-care, for not being more organized, for inappropriate expectations of myself and you. The start of any path to forgiveness has to be forgiving yourself. 8 years seems like a long time, but when I look back on it, it feels like I should have done more, loved you more, pastored to you more fully. So I have to forgive myself these things before I can forgive anyone else, like my sister. The hard thing about forgiveness for many of us is that it's not an intellectual endeavor. It's a spiritual one. Just this first forgiving myself seems insurmountable. And it is, if I stay in my head. But forgiving is a heart thing, and hearts work magic. Love flows from the heart, and if I'm going to love anyone else, I have to start by loving myself. If I can forgive myself for not being more, I suddenly have more capacity to love others. Does anybody here get Yes magazine? No. Oh. The byline is Journalism for People Building a Better World. In the most recent, there is an article called A Journey from Rage to Mindfulness by a woman named Ruth King. There are a lot of ways her life resonates with mine. She was trained in organizational development. I never took a course, but that's what I did in my prior life. She grew up through the social upheaval in Watts in the 60s. And for those of you who are too young to remember, there were riots in the Watts neighborhood of LA that became a flashpoint for the civil rights movement in the mid-60s. I cut my activist teeth back then, mostly through Judaism, though there was a lot of connection between the Jews and some of the black leadership of the time, especially Martin Luther King. I think I've told this story before. It was told by the current president of Starr King School for the Ministry, Rosemary Brayman McNatt, how she was privileged to have a conversation with Coretta Scott King, where King told McNatt they almost became Unitarians, but they didn't think it would be a good fit for black people. Still, there was a close relationship in Philadelphia between Washington, D.C. and New York. Was right in the middle of a lot of the East Coast unrest. But that's where the similarity between Ruth King and I ends. She went on to get a degree in clinical psychology, and she is black. And she accomplished so much more in her life than I have. Ooh, this is an opportunity to forgive myself. She was raised by a mostly single mom in South Central LA, while I watched the news reports with horror. She became a mom at age 15, and at 27, she faced open heart surgery. Now, 2 of Ruth King's aunts had gone into the hospital for something simple and never came out. So King's mom had an intense fear of hospitals and institutions run by white people. And she wasn't alone. If you are familiar with the story of Henrietta Lacks, written by Rebecca Skloot, then you know how generations of black people continue to distrust white medicine. In Ruth King's words, can you imagine the risk I took as a black woman saying yes to open heart surgery, knowing I would face disapproval from my mother, fearing that she might be right, that I was being an absolute fool for allowing white people to experiment with my heart? But I had to say yes to the surgery. I was the walking dead. Rage was both keeping me alive and killing me. What was interesting about the heart surgery is that in retrospect, I can see how the surgical procedure was in fact the beginning of a spiritual journey of open-heartedness, reparation, and reclaiming tenderness. Living on red alert and in constant racial defense, I had to surrender to the perceived white enemy surgeon and give over my heart. In fact, the surgeon had more access to my heart than I did at that time. That's the end of the quote. She now leads workshops on healing rage Women Making Inner Peace Possible, and Mindful of Race, Transforming Racism from the Inside Out. And she has an organization called Mindful of Race Institute. Her healing from surgery took her into Buddhism and mindfulness meditation and taught her what she calls the universal laws of nature. Nothing in life is personal, permanent, or perfect. Think about how forgiveness fits into the paradigm. She talks about wise awareness, a way to still ourselves and be present. There is no greater healing or liberation than to, in this potent pause, ask and have answered, is how I am thinking and feeling contributing to suffering or to freedom? Imagine asking yourself this each time you are treated unfairly, and also with each self-judgmental thought. I'm going to try this. There's a Jewish theologian named Mark Ellis. He has a different take on Jewish theology of the Holocaust from Elie Wiesel, who some of you, I hope, have heard of. Wiesel, a survivor of the Holocaust, coined the saying, "never again." Many Jews continue to hold tightly to this Holocaust theology. But Ellis thinks this is wrong because modern Israel puts Palestinians in camps in the name of their victimhood from the war. Ellis says this is not okay, and that in order to forgive, you have to be willing to forget. It is an important part of letting go and moving on. That book was published in 1987, and it just grows in relevance as Jewish people still hold on to never again, we must not forget. But I find myself thinking of this as I think of Putin and Ukraine. How does any of this help when someone is acting as an invading force and killing civilians? Forgiving Putin may be beyond my capacity, but does that mean I'm powerless? I don't think so. I think of Ellis and Ruth King and our story today. All of them talk about ways to transform our lives and how we interpret violence to ourselves and others. In order to be at peace with ourselves, we can't be carrying resentments towards others or anger at ourselves. Peace, like forgiveness, demands that we see the world from a perspective other than our own. To have wise awareness and a loving and forgiving heart is how I think we are called as Unitarian Universalists to sit among those with different points of view and find the middle way. And I believe that if more people could do this, there will be a tipping point where love can obliterate war. It's crucial if we are to preserve our planet for our children and their children. If I can move toward a more loving and forgiving heart, I can add my energy to others who are working for peace. And that is a place to start. Amen. And I invite you to join in our closing hymn, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." It is in the gray hymnal, 126. And for those on YouTube, the words will be on the screen.
Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune our hearts to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise.
We extinguish this chalice from the words from Isaac Pennington. Our life is love, peace and tenderness, and bearing with one another, and forgiving one another, and not laying accusations, one another against another, but praying for another, and helping one another up with a tender hand.
This week, let us send some healing thoughts to little Jude and Sue's family. There it is. Let us focus all our prayers on the people in Ukraine, those who perished and those who lost family, those who are hunkered down in fear, and those who are being forced to fight. Let's extend our prayers for all those the world over who are suffering. Let us pray. Amen, and may it be so.
And thank you, Mary. A special thank you, this is announcement time, goes out to Phyllis Adams, Reverend Patty Pomerantz, Mary Reese, and John Netherton, who worked really hard on this beautiful service. Next week's service is titled, How Much for Myself and How Much for Others? I think it's a great topic. And Elaine Castles will be presenting that with Cynthia Hopkins as the worship leader. There is an announcement here. The families are coming. Easter Sunday with our first family potluck and games for kids. Also coming is a weekly Zoom call for parents and more. Also, some of you, I tried to get it to everybody, but it was this morning and I might have missed somebody. There is an announcement. We are looking at auction 2022 and the possibility of what we want to do. Katie Norris and I are kind of spearheading that, but we want it to be fun, simple, enjoyable, and we encourage you to read my email if you got it. And if you didn't get an email and you want it, let me know and I'll send you a copy of it. But do respond with suggestions or ideas or whatever. It'll be That would be nice. Also, there are lots of announcements in the Petals that comes out on Fridays, and I'm not going to say all of them, but really what would be helpful maybe for you is to print out the Petals while you're reading it, or highlight those particular items that seem interesting to you, because I know I'll say, oh, that's really good, and then I forget. So if I don't write it in my calendar or print it out and put it on my stack of papers, then it gets gone. The service is over. Now it's time for visiting. And those on the screen at home, you can participate in a Zoom conversation. Thank you all, and have a great Sunday.